all joined together. I thought with the music, that music going, we could all...
Sorry, that was my suggestion, and I realised it's quite an intense way to walk into an event. Midway through a kind of...
communal sound bath.
Giant, yeah.
Tuesday night sound bath.
Yes, I do love that record though.
Well, my mic has had enough, but hopefully you guys will have a bit more patience for us. Thank you, Tom, for that lovely introduction. Also, thank you, Tom, for that beautiful acknowledgement of country. Just to double down, I was going to say unnecessarily. I mean, it's always necessary. I think it's just good to pause for a minute and think about the tens of thousands of years that this land has had storytellers and music and culture. And at gatherings like this, it's always nice to contextualise the conversation we're going to have and the conversations we might have later in that big, broad, cosmic history, which we're really lucky to have as part of the land that we live on. My name is Tim Shiel. We're so happy that you could all come tonight. Just a tiny bit on me. I'm a musician. I've been making music for a time. Just trying to make that call about whether I really want to say how many years or not.
But you could include, being a piano student as a child,
No. Okay, no. Hey, this is fun actually. Nat, guess my musical background. Have a crack at it.
Oh, I think I might know this. Did you start with beat making?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, I learnt guitar as a teenager, obsessed with Nirvana and Soundgarden. My mate showed me how to do power chords.
Great.
And then I figured out Fruity Loops and software like that, and eventually became a beat maker.
Cool.
But we're not here to talk about me. I'm a musician. I've also done a bunch of radio, Double J, Triple J, Triple R over the years. But I'm here primarily as a friend and a fan of Nat Bartsch. Thank you, yes.
Thank you.
So we're here to talk about Nat's incredible record. How many people here have heard this album, know this album? Maybe raise your hand if you have heard this record before. This is good for us to know. Excellent. So we've got a good crew of fans.
Thanks for listening.
And do me a favour maybe, just because it might help us with where we take the conversation, but how many people here are musicians themselves or pianists of some sort? So excellent. Great. So we'll do our best not to dumb it down, because we've got a room of
great
musos here to figure out how this record was made. We're going to hear a song really in just a moment. We've actually just been listening to John Hopkins, which is a record that you love, right?
Yeah.
But we're going to hear one of Nat's tunes in a sec. But before we do, origin story.
Okay.
Nat Bartsch.
I started piano as a child when I was about 4 years old. I did the classical piano thing. Wasn't very good at it. Eventually,
you're allowed to not be good at it at 4 years old.
Well, all the way out into teenage years.
Oh, okay.
It's true. No, it's true. Yes, no pressure at all when I was 4. But
that's interesting. Hang on. So you were studying all the way through, but you already had that feeling of I'm not going to be a maestro or something. What was that?
Well, I grew up in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, where I guess musical opportunities were probably pretty limited. And, AMEB exams were the only measure of, musical advancement.
As it should be.
And I started out at the Yamaha Music School doing group lessons and loved it, but then went into AMEB, and I think because I was undiagnosed neurodivergent, I loved the structure of notation and repertoire, but I just couldn't sit and practice it very well. So I have a very unusual origin story, I guess, because now I'm a sort of classical composer and just finished a master's at the Conservatorium of Music. But to get there, I had to pivot, and I first learned how to play pop and rock music and played a lot in bands, and then did my jazz degree at VCA, and then became a composer as a jazz artist and found my way back to classical kind of on my own terms, which was really important. Otherwise, I don't think I would have kept going. Yeah.
Yeah. When you say pop and rock, what are you talking about?
Oh, I used to play in, all the way back at the beginning, I used to play in kind of cover bands and
Like
with
playing
singer-songwriters,
keys in a
playing
cover
keys,
band, yeah.
backing vocals. With singer-songwriters. I used to play with artists like Whittaker, Ryan Meeking, Matt Corby, Ella Thompson.
Yes.
Yeah, all the way back when Ella was at VCAS. I was playing with Ella. I used to play a lot in R&B, like neo-soul cover bands, stuff like that. That was how I started, yeah. And then eventually found my way to performing my own music more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that experience of kind of you've stepped out of the traditional training for a pianist and you're experiencing music in different contexts, did that help kind of you get past that feeling of like, oh, the only way I can evaluate my talent as a pianist is how well I'm doing in my exams?
Yes, definitely. But I feel like the music industry there's always going to be a way of comparing yourself to others.
Yeah.
And there's always, communities and organisations and genres that function in a certain way that can make it feel like it's not the space for you. And I think for late diagnosed neurodivergent people, you kind of feel like a fish out of water most of the time, from the start of the day to the end of the day. And so I think ultimately that's why I ended up being such a genre bender, because it meant I never had to address that question of whether I felt like I was fitting in to the jazz scene or as a classical composer or, backstage at Groove in the Moo or wherever. It was just doing my thing. So
Fitting in is overrated. So.
It really is. I think it's much better to be in the corner by yourself.
No.
No, but doing something you really enjoy and not having to make eye contact with anyone, it's just the best. Yeah, you can talk about your favourite interest for as long as you want.
Yes,
it's no one else's turn to talk.
All right, sorry. I was going to say maybe you could be in the corner with the other people who also want to be in the corner.
Yes.
But also, if you want to be in the corner on your own, that is completely valid.
I feel like this forum is a little bit like me being in my corner, and then I've just invited some people to come and hang out with me in my corner. So thank you.
No one puts baby in the corner except Nat Bartsch. That is a reference to a film that probably came out before many of you were born. I'm going to try and keep that to a minimum. So we should also mention that you are an ARIA-nominated artist, and the album we're talking about, Forever Changed, is your ninth record that came out November last year.
Yes. Yeah.
I think we should hear a song from it.
Yes, let's do that.
So, for those who haven't heard Nat's album, it is just gorgeous and pure and beautiful, and enjoy it however you want to. You may want to close your eyes. You may find yourself wanting to do that. That's completely valid. You can also stare down me or Nat like in some sort of intense contest. But we're actually gonna start with a song that's a bit deeper in the record, Arrival.
Yeah.
I think we should just listen to that in full, and then we can start talking about it.
Cool.
A quiet round of applause, please.
Thank you. Thanks. This was very odd, being on stage but just listening to the song.
That was you.
It was me.
That was you.
Yeah.
I've been looking forward to tonight because the world is on fire, and it's nice on a Tuesday night to just be in a room full of friendly people and listen to beautiful piano music. So on behalf of us, or just me, thank you for this.
That's been my MO for a long time. What else is there to do but make nice music to help people get through the day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get into that, because I know that was a framing for this whole album, really.
Yeah.
That impulse. But
yeah.
Given that we've just heard it,
yeah.
Let's talk about that song. But also wanted to mention, this is an intimate event. There's really just, there's a handful of us here. If any of you have questions, as Tom mentioned before, we've got a microphone we can rove around with, but we don't have to wait till the end of the chat. If you've got questions in your mind now, just keep them in your mind, and I can come to you pretty soon with them, even if they're nerdy production or composition questions like Nat's right here. That's what we're here to talk about. All right, I want to start with the piano. That's you. Is that all one take, or are you stitching together different parts of piano takes?
That's different parts.
Yep.
Not I think it might have been a comp of 3 different takes maximum.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not like a super, super granular level of editing.
Right.
But
like, I love the way this note sounds, and I'm going to splice it into this note.
Every once in a while, the dark arts of piano editing is a good thing, because you can get the sparkliness of a particular take is saved by that one spliced note. But for the most part, I just try and let the imperfections be. There's things in there that don't sound right. Like, as in, the piano didn't sound as well as it could. Things that I went to try and improvise that didn't go very well. But I'm a big believer in it. An album is just capturing a moment as much as it, is reasonable for it to be that. And then sprinkling all the fairy dust on top of that. So, yeah, I mean, the song is about, I guess it actually has 2 different, the composition itself exists in the world in 2 ways. The first is, it was the 3rd movement of a chamber music commission I wrote for a piano trio called Muses Trio. And they asked me to write a work called Under the Thinking Tree. And I wrote it about the process of decision making, which is what that was the prompt they gave me, about lying under this tree and thinking. And these 3 movements each represent a part of the thinking process. And the 3rd movement, which is Arrival, the final one, is about when you've arrived at a decision. And even though it might be really difficult and there might be a really tough journey ahead, that it's just so incredibly cathartic to have just decided what you're going to do. And in this sort of new repainting of it, there's some violin and cello parts that are the same as the original album, but it's sort of a much more epic beast than the original. And I like to think of it as kind of more like self-fulfillment, or arriving in a new place in your life where everything is the way that you have always wanted it to be, where you feel comfortable and safe around the people that you love, and safe out in the world. You feel like you can be yourself and have a real sense of kind of who you are, and that just that celebration of discovering your true identity. And the little recording at the end is of my son Will. There's 2 different recordings stitched together, but one is of him laughing while I'm playing peekaboo with him after a shower, and another one is of him playing with his new stepdad, Hayden, who coincidentally was the recording and mix engineer for the album. So we recorded the piano at home while Will was sleeping in the next room on my upright piano at home. And then the whole sound world was created in our family home. So it's a really, I still weep when I perform it.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's a really, I mean, I make emotional music most of the time, but that one is a particularly, meaningful piece for me. Yeah.
You can hear Will giggling, but he says something?
Yeah, you're always making me laugh. Everything you say makes me laugh. And then Hayden goes, oh, good.
well, that's good.
Oh, good.
Nice. How old was Will at that time?
He would have been 7.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Or maybe...
This is like last year.
So 6.5. Yeah, last year.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And I just had a feeling that I wanted to put Will on the album because he... this album is kind of lullabies that are... I define a lullaby as, a soothing piece of music inspired by the family environment. It's not necessarily a song to get babies to sleep. But I have a previous album called Forever and No Time at All, which was influenced by interviews with music therapists about how to get babies to feel calm. And unsurprisingly, their advice was often to make sure the parents are calm. So everybody can kind of relax. And so I made that album and over time it went really well. And the last song has Will, when he's 6 months old, sort of gurgling and making these really cute baby sounds. So I wanted to put Will on the new album, even though it's a totally different context. But yeah, that's where the giggles came into it.
So you're saying that you recorded this at home while Will was asleep. If he wasn't asleep, would this have been like a bashing it out Ben Folds kind of record or something?
Yeah.
Is it the only reason that it's beautiful lullabies the fact that you had a child sleeping in the next room?
Well, actually, half the time he was at his dad's and we recorded it without him, which was really a relief because let's be honest, any workplace where you have to have your kids around, it's hard to get work done.
School holidays can
yes.
relate? Yep.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
School holidays, work from home, that might just be a me thing.
No. Yeah.
Right.
Anyone else who might be going through that, I feel you. But he, the way that he was kind of woven into the album in many ways meant that even when I was sitting there by myself and he wasn't around, or whether he was sleeping in the next room or whether he was awake, it's always this kind of feeling and mindset that I'm creating at the piano. Today I actually was practicing my live show and Will came out and brought all his teddies and set it up as like a lounge room concert and then kicked back in a sensory beanbag. And then when I got to the song that we'd co-written, he dutifully got out of the beanbag to come up and play it as a duet. So yeah, I have a very cinematic kind of household, really, don't I?
Yeah. The
poignant music and the poignant stories. But it's a really personal album for that reason. And to know that a lot of this was I'd write a little sketch at the piano or improvise something while he was falling asleep a few years ago, and I just captured that on my phone. And then a year or two later, I'm actually working that into a composition and being able to, this time around, play a draft back in the car and then Will could give me feedback. It was really great. Yes. And he has really influenced a lot of the sounds you hear. So, yeah.
That track really is indicative of a lot of the record and a lot of your work in that, there is some beautiful fairy dust on that piece, the way it's all constructed, but really the skeleton of it and the heart of it is your piano performance. And just listening to the mix, the way where the piano sits all the way through. There's a couple of moments towards the end of that track where you start to feel like the arrangement is starting to take the centre stage or maybe slightly foreground.
Yeah.
But for the most part, not really. No, there's a sense that even though you are bringing in strings and other elements, they're just supporting your performance, which isn't always the case with these. That's a choice. But in terms of fairy dust, so I heard strings.
Yeah.
Was there also a synth bass, like a low bass, or is that just
no, there would have been. Yeah, there would have been synth bass.
There was a moment where it felt like the bass just felt like it was starting to envelop and hit these frequencies that I'm not sure that strings naturally get to.
Yeah. There was there was synth bass. I think it was a model. Is it a Model D plugin? Moog plugin. Doing some synth bass, and then there was also all sorts of arpeggiators running around. So there was some Juno-based soft synth plugins that I sort of tweaked a little bit. And then I used a lot of these two plugins called Fragments and Pigments. These are all come from Arturia's sort of suite of different plugins, and a thing called Analog Lab, which is kind of like a way that you can access the enormity of analog synths that are out there in a way that's affordable, and you don't have to do any heavy lifting or spend months or years learning how to use them, which for me has been really important because this life stage and with my type of brain, you know, to sit in front of, you know, a fair light,
yes,
probably not going to make much progress. But so there was a long period of time after I tracked the piano and recorded string overdubs. I spent a really long period of time kind of cultivating a sound world. I knew how I wanted it to sound in my head, but I spent a long time basically checking out hundreds or maybe even thousands of presets that were available across a whole bunch of different like soft synth plug-in versions of synths, as well as some of the more like modern effects-based like granular synthesis type plugins, and then also using a lot of the ambient reverbs and delays in pedals and in Ableton that I work with. And, you know, step one was almost like cataloguing them. You know, I've got sections in Analog Lab that say things like glitchy and blippy or 80s vibes. And then
so you're like cataloguing the presets.
Yeah.
You're picking the ones you like and filtering them into folders or something.
Yeah, because I suppose like, you know, music for film and music supervisors and stuff are very used to that idea of trying to represent a sound as a feeling or a colour. And because I was trying to exist with the music in a way that was thinking much more about texture than it was about what specific instrument it was, because I wanted to make it a sensory-seeking album that reflected a lot of the feedback I'd had from neurodivergent people and music therapists about music that they found soothing, and as well as myself, you know. I wanted to sort of have this wall of sound around me. So that meant actually those really detailed cinematic plugins that you might often hear in film was a really good place to start. These sort of multi-dimensional pads and things, you know, stuff that would slowly evolve like a soundscape. So step one was creating that sound world, and then step two was trying to make it my own. So tweaking plugins and making it fit for purpose a little more, which was a big process. And then also, of course, figuring out what to use where, how not to burn the toast, and also what to do with all of the acoustic instruments and what needed to be processed and run through effects. And what parts of the recordings needed to be, edited or discarded or just run through so many effects that you can't even hear the dry recording anymore. All of those micro decisions happened along the way as well. Was that the answer to your question? I can't even remember where we started.
It's the answer to about 20 questions that I cannot take credit for thinking of. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Cool. Awesome.
We should hear another song, I think, and keep chatting.
Yeah.
But before I do, I did promise, you know, if anyone had a specific question about the song we just heard while it's in our mind, does anybody have something for Nat that they'd like to ask about what we heard? Maybe we'll come back to that. I think we should hear a really short track called Fizzy Feelings, and then dig back into the reason for this record and the process of it coming together in the first place.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
So that's the opening track of the record, Nat. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the record's called Forever Changed.
Yep.
And you've already mentioned it many times, but you've spoken about how this album is a celebration of your diagnosis later in life as a neurospicy human being.
Mm-hmm.
So is Fizzy Feelings as a track name a reference?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I just came up with that title. I don't think I encountered it anywhere, but Fizzy Feelings is describing that sort of sensory dysregulation that a lot of autistic and ADHD people can have, where it's like you've got all this energy and you don't know what to do with it. It might be, super busy mind, or, a body that can't sit still. You need to stim, you need to calm down in some way. My previous Lullaby album starts with a little opening track called Breathing In and Out, and that is a much simpler kind of ascending arpeggio-based meditative opener that's sort of trying to get you to think about your breathing or feel your baby's breathing in your arms. But this time it was like, no, the problem with a lot of the sort of soothing music genre, or whatever you might call it, is it is kind of implying that the way that we need to be soothed is pretty much consistently homogenous. But actually that's not entirely true. I mean, obviously everybody has musical preferences, and not everybody's turning to the Spotify peaceful piano playlist to calm themselves down, even though millions have done so. The Fizzy Feelings is sort of a track that's trying to acknowledge that the music needs to meet you where you're at. You're not ready to kind of sit and listen to a really introspective, quiet, slow piece of music just yet. If you're anything like me and a lot of the other people I've listened to, when they need calming down, they're up here somewhere. So track 3 is the first solo piano piece you hear, and hopefully by then you're kind of ready to have that kind of simplicity in the sound. So, yeah.
But is it also, for people whose maybe experience doesn't feel the same as that, is listening to a track like Fizzy Feelings, is the intention to give them a sense of what it feels like?
Yes, spot on. So I just went really close into the microphone because it was so important you asked that question. I suppose with both of these Lullaby albums, I really have always hoped that the music will be enjoyed by people well beyond the intended original audience, and whether some babies fall asleep to Forever in No Time at all is or not, that matters. But what is actually more meaningful is it enjoyed by people that do not even have children as well, or adults when they're playing it to their kids in the car. And it's the same for this record. I think the album and also the live show, part of it is trying to share some music with the world that's kind of created for, by and with the neurodivergent community, and inviting everybody to actually engage with that and try and think about what that's like. So even my live shows that are for a general audience, you still have soothing visual projections, and the music is constructed in a way that is hopefully a very relaxed environment and is showing people a different way that you could experience a concert like this, where I really don't mind if anyone leaves and comes back. You can clap between movements, you can do anything you like. So I'd like to think anyone is getting a sense of it.
I know you've talked about, well, I'm curious to know more about the process of, like, at some point I guess you decide that this is going to be a framing device for the record of, like, there's going to be music intended to soothe neurodivergent people. Of course, it ends up being much more than that, but that's a place to start. But I know you mentioned that you interviewed a bunch of people to kind of try and understand what soothes them. Can you talk a bit about what that process was like? I imagine that was before any music was written.
Yes,
maybe?
well before, it was during COVID. And I had this process with the first one where I connected with some music therapists who worked with babies and their parents in the neonatal intensive care unit, and they were sort of the gateway to understanding a bit of the research about it all that existed in the music therapy community. And so it was important to kind of repeat that process. And so one of the things I did was interview some music therapists who work with autistic clients of all ages, and they described a little bit what it's like to find music that their clients engage with and find soothing. And then I also interviewed other autistic and ADHD people, and it's a very small sample size. And of course, every neurodivergent person is different, just the same as every baby is different. So this is never going to be music that will be soothing for everyone. But I kind of just collected a little sort of short list of musical parameters, you know, compositionally and also production-wise, that represent what I was hearing. And they also represent what I find soothing in music too, because part of the discovery of my neurodivergent identity was going through the process of divorce and repartnering, and there's a lot of grief in that as well as the joy. And during that process, all those big transitions, which autistic people often struggle with, I was just absolutely smashing At the Drive-In and Meshuggah and Floating Points, that John Hopkins record, you know, stuff that's really epic sounding. Visceral, exactly.
Loud music.
And that's what I was hearing from the people that I spoke to. They described things like grounding rhythms, you know, rhythms that you can really anchor yourself and listen to with like a real repetition to it. Synth bass, where you can feel it, you know, moving your internal organs. But also a lot of detail and texture in sound, which, you know, if you think about a lot of neurodivergent people are really good with the detail in a lot of things. It made sense to me, I guess, when I heard that it might be really soothing to listen to a piece of music where it's not just some kind of long ambient reverb like a neurotypical music listener might enjoy, but it's like a black hole reverb that's got octave repeats and it's going up into the stratosphere. It's got granular synthesis in it and it's getting all these spiky, random, textured high frequencies that are sort of appearing out of the sound. So I tried to apply that sort of stuff to this really intimate piano record. It's, I guess, kind of like, At the Drive-In meets Nat Bartsch or something. No, that doesn't really describe it. But
is anyone here familiar with At the Drive-In? I should probably contextualise that. They're a very loud, aggressive post-grunge band. Yeah, that's right. But
it's
I love
really, when I mention ever at a gig that this is the music that's inspired me, it's a lot of blank faces. And I think that's because people that would come to see a Nat Bartsch concert aren't normally the ones that would listen to Swedish metal.
I'm going to take a stab at this. At the Drive-In is prog Rage Against the Machine.
Oh, I would agree with that.
Does that make sense to anybody if I use those references? No, maybe?
No.
Yeah. Thank you. Tim Shiel 1, World 0. Let's hear. I think we should hear one more song. There's a part of me that just wants to sit and listen to your album and not talk. But I know we're here to talk. So
I'm happy either way.
And if anybody has questions, please keep them in and we'll get to that. Let's just hear the next song on the record. That's 39, right?
Yeah.
This is track 2.
Yes.
You mentioned like these are the first 2 songs before you get into a more settled solo piano piece. This is the one at the
This
start.
is the one to kind of bring you down from those fizzy feelings.
Yeah.
I started writing it on my 39th birthday, and it's one of those pieces where if you listen to the initial sketch, almost nothing has remained, except maybe the opening melody, and it's just that it just continued to evolve and evolve. And both Fizzy Feelings and 39 are actually double-tracked piano, so you have a sort of, you know, textured, repetitive part, and then you have a melody that sort of sits on top. And that type of like pop producing approach is not something I would have felt comfortable doing with my earlier records, where I felt like I should be a serious jazz or classical artist. But now I just really don't care too much about that.
Is naivety on my part? Are you saying like left hand is one take and the right hand's the second take? Or
no, well, it's more that I wanted to use both my hands to create an accompaniment that was kind of more detailed and interesting.
So when you play this live,
I have to simplify in a certain way. But the other reason actually is to do with ambient effects, because I wanted to have a piano melody that I could go and run through, you know, some kind of sparkly delay or something, and not have the bulk of the piano ostinatos and chords and stuff kind of muddying up the sound. Okay. So a lot of the time it comes from that. Or in Fizzy Feelings, the rippley piano you hear is the thing I wanted to process and make it all smooshed and reverberant. Yeah. So, yeah.
What else will we hear? Because we like prime us for what we're about to hear. What else will we hear in this 39?
Yeah.
There's harp in this?
Yes, there's harp. An incredible harp player called Mary Dumani, who actually, that's probably, other than my own improvisational parts of my piano pieces, which I always do no matter what genre category I've ticked when I submit it online. Mary is the other improviser, so I just let her do her thing, and then worked with that sound to process it and do different things. And then there's violin and cello and viola, which was actually 2 string players and 2 different sessions, but the same mic in the same room and 4 chairs. So it sounds like a string quartet, but actually the violinist and viola player was just a single person moving into different seats. So top tip if you want to save some money on string players.
Right. So you just record again, they move seats, play a different part.
But because they're in the room in a different position to the microphone, I owe Hayden Buxton a big credit for that technique, recording technique. But again, you know, if a core classical album, I guess, wouldn't officially sanction that type of thing, although I must say classical albums are the most edited recordings you will ever experience. So, yeah, think about that next time you're trying to sound as good as, you know, someone who's recorded the Goldberg Variations. Anyway.
Let's return to that hot take in just a minute.
But, so there's strings and there's arpeggiated Juno sounds and lots of synth pads and effects. And there's also some birds. There's a magpie in our backyard. I called him Gary the magpie. And there's a single note arpeggiator, Juno. It's just a single note that sort of in the live show, it kind of pans around you, or if you listen to it in Atmos, you might hear it moving around. And I was always like, I just really need to do this, and I don't know why. And then I got to the live show, and a neurodivergent audience member said to me, "That is the most satisfying sound I've ever heard." I was like, yes, my gut feeling was a good one. But anyway, I hope you enjoy it. It's a very unusual thing to do.
Get your bingo cards out. So we were looking for a fake string quartet. We're looking for
a semi-fake.
Improvised harp, Gary the Magpie.
Yeah.
See if you can hear all these things in this track. 39. Yes. Thank you, Nat.
Thank you.
Oh. I love that song. Is so like by the end it's so rich, you know. Like I don't know if it's exactly 50-50, right? But it's, and again, forgive me because I'm a bit of a pleb when it comes to harmony and music theory, but in that track it's kind of like you're in one kind of space for about half the track, and then it just really feels like you're starting to shift into this new harmonic world and all this richness and a bit of darkness, but not necessarily in a bad way.
Yeah.
Enters, and by the end it feels like you've gone through a process where you could have, and no shade to all of the wonderful neoclassical pianists and composers that are out there, but you could quite easily have just sat at that beautiful motif that you've set up in that early in that track.
Yeah.
You could have just stayed there for 3 or 4 minutes and at the end gone dink. Isn't that nice? But there's a moment where the song kind of, it's not like it turns like evil or anything like that.
No. Yeah,
but it deepens.
I appreciate that you noticed that, Tim. I think for me, there's a lot about that, I guess, the rise of the neoclassical genre that has really suited my style of playing and my style of composing, because I love working with ostinatos and patterns and arpeggios. I've always loved ambient effects and being an ambient artist. But for me, I need to kind of represent a kind of, I guess, the jazz harmony, like a particularly modal harmony, and also, I guess, this sort of impressionistic melodic lyricism that you often don't hear in a lot of the solo piano tracks that are out there.
Yeah, or the Spotify playlist that you mentioned before.
Yeah, the peaceful piano. Yeah.
Where it's like, I've had a friend describe that as the white keys. Like it may as well, it could just be called the white keys.
White keys.
You know?
Yeah. And I've had...
listening to stuff like that, again, no shade, but it makes that piece feel so much richer by comparison. Yeah,
well, thanks. I mean, and I think you're right. There's no shame in composing only with the white keys, and as I think, as long as you're faithful to who you want to be as an artist, I think often people are a little seduced by the idea of getting on the perfect playlist, or not having the resources to dream bigger with their instrumentation, their production choices, and feel a need to kind of change who they are to fit with what they might be trendy. And I spend a lot of time as a mentor to emerging pianist composers, really trying to help them answer that question of how do they want this music to kind of evolve and grow, like within the piece of music, but also over the course of the album and also over the course of your lifetime. You know, when there might be only so many times that you make a record, and you want to be lying on your deathbed looking back and thinking of what you've made and feel like it really is what you want to do.
Yeah.
And so and if what you want to do is be incredibly kind of faithful to the origins of minimalism and keep things, not necessarily all the white keys, but keep things very meditative and simple in its construction and simply played, I think you can tell when someone's heart is really in that.
Yes.
Compared to when they feel like that's what they should sound like.
Yes.
And I think for me, I've always needed to be very authentic to who I am. In fact, for a long time, music was the only place where I knew what that was, because I didn't know who I actually was. So I always, there's this joke about sad piano, that it's always sad piano. And a fellow composer in Australia actually created an album inspired by me saying that phrase once on national radio. And props to him for meeting that challenge of creating a sad piano album. I like to think of my music as happy sad, or it's just music for all the feelings. It doesn't matter whether they're good or bad. But also conversely, it's music where I'd like to think you put it on and you just don't really know where it will go. Will there be a post-rock instrumental epic song with a slide guitar solo by the end, or a, symphony orchestra or some beats, I'd like to think that's when I'm on my deathbed, I can be like, I finally got around to that beat-making album. Yeah, great.
Does anybody have any questions for Nat? I think we might take a couple of questions now.
Hi, Nat. I was just wondering you, if possible, to describe the harmonic changes that happened in that last piece. How you discussed how it changed in the second half of it. Modulations, modal changes, whatever. Could you just give us some sort of description of that?
Yeah, that is. Thank you for putting me on the spot there.
Need a keyboard.
No, because in a way, my inability to properly answer that question is really meaningful to me. I have absorbed inadvertently a lot of music and compositional theory and stuff as a jazz artist, as a composer, and as a music lover and stuff for a long time. But again, one of the really liberating things about discovering my real brain was finally being able to be kind to myself about the fact that I actually can't recall most of the things that I've learned in kind of like in words. Like it's in there somewhere, but if I had to do a written exam about the things that I learned in my undergrad degree or my master's degree, I would probably fail it. I just can't remember. And I have always composed kind of from instinct. Whenever I'm writing a piece of music, I am always as far away from Sibelius as possible. I sit at my instrument and I will record either a voice memo on my phone, or I have like an analog 4-track recorder type of thing, and scribbles on a page. I'm not planning the key signature, the time signature, anything for as long as possible. And often the only time I can answer that question is if I'm delivering like a lecture on the piece of music, and then I have to go back and really look at what I've done, or it's when I'm notating it for others to perform. So I'm getting it into Sibelius for string players or for my jazz ensemble. I can tell you that 39 starts in D major, but then that final section is in F sharp minor, which is kind of a related key area, but not necessarily, it's not like, I guess, to be very consonant about it. It's not like the relative minor. But that's all I could say right now without getting my like proper brain on to think about it. But I'd like to think that really normalises the fact that there are different ways to learn music and make music, and what's really good is doing it from the heart. Yeah, someone else can analyse it later if you get famous enough, maybe.
So would you say for a track like that, you're more just exploring it as you are writing it, rather than intellectually going, what would be interesting if we went from here to here?
Yeah.
You're actually you're feeling it out with your fingers.
Yes.
And then when it feels right, you're like, that feels right. And you're recording it on your phone or something.
Yeah.
So you can listen back later and go, oh, wow, for some reason I went from this chord to that chord. And you can explain it later maybe, but in the moment you just do it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to be very playful. And the thing I love about having studied jazz is how I can improvise my way around the piano in a really fluid way. So I can explore a greater range of concepts. I think a lot in slash chords and in jazz chords with extensions, as a way of kind of capturing what it is that I'm kind of doing with my two hands. And I'm often trying to think about if something has just been a little too static for too long, like it's been in D major for too long, I'm often thinking, what's the melody I've written doing? What pitches are happening there? How can they be recontextualised with a different chord underneath? That's about as deep as it goes. But so, maybe the C of the melody might have been the third of an A minor chord for the first minute and a half. But a C can be also, the major third of an A flat major 7 chord, or the ninth of a, the ninth of a B flat major
Jazz brain,
9.
jazz
Yeah.
brain.
But so that's probably the way I open up the door to different harmonic solutions or progressions beyond where I'm currently at. Yeah, the rest of it's just, fumbling around.
Fumbling around. Does anyone else have questions for Nat? It would be great to... yes, great.
I don't think I've got a question here, but it's more of a statement on the way you play piano. And one thing that sticks out for me is your pedalling. And it's almost like you've created another instrument just based on your pedalling. Well, it doesn't. You don't notice as much when there's all the other effects and other instruments going. But say, for example, the first song, and because I was always taught your pedals connected to your ear, and I think it doesn't ring any truer than when I listen to you play, and you get these colours that just linger on, and then these perfect pedal changes. Like, I don't hear any pedal changes. It's like, it's really, I think it's quite amazing.
Oh,
Reveal your
thank you.
secrets, Nat.
Thank you for noticing that.
Yeah.
When I was in my undergrad degree at VCA, I used to get feedback in my recitals like, you need to use less pedal, because I always did this very syrupy, ECM jazz thing, and it didn't really show a lot of diversity in what I was presenting. And I'm really glad I ignored that and kept doing it. But it should be said, actually, I have a chronic pain condition in like my arm and my leg. And my right leg is now like about half a centimetre shorter than my left leg. It's the equivalent of being a pro soccer player and having a non-kicking leg that's shorter, or a tennis player who's got one big arm, one small arm. So there has been a price to pay for that type of pedaling, because it is constant, and I do a lot of half pedaling and sort of micro pedaling movements, which and no one really learns how to have good pedaling technique. That's not really talked about that much. So yeah, it's thank you for acknowledging the cost. In a way, that it's really nice to know that you noticed that. Thank you.
Excellent question. There wasn't a
Thank
question.
You for that comment.
Yes, that was great. Yeah.
Hi, Nat.
Hello.
I have a question. You've talked a lot about how personal this album is to you tonight, and I feel that can be a little daunting for some artists to put something out into the world that is such a part of who they are and their family and their safe space. Did you ever hesitate? If not, why do you think that is? And if yes, how did you move through that?
Oh, that's such a great question. I remember I recently did the Peggy Glanville Hicks address for the Australian Music Centre, which was a sort of 30-minute speech about neurodiversity. And someone said, it's so great of you to be so brave and so honest. And I remember saying, I don't think you understand. It's actually way easier for me to be honest than it is to present a sort of curated version of myself to the world, because I'm an autistic person, and a lot of autistic people like to be really honest. And so it comes really naturally. So actually the hard work has been making sure that what it is I'm sharing is exactly the right type of stuff, because you can't share everything about your life all the time, and it's a bit probably self-indulgent to do so, so in a way that has been easier for me. I think also there's something about when you feel like you've been always a fish out of water, or not fitting in, or not understood, so much liberating has happened from being able to just have these forums to share who I really am. It was somebody recently mentioned me in conversation. I was away from them, but they said, oh, why are you working with Nat Bartsch? She's crazy. And it was referring to this one recording session, like this one session that I bailed on the day, playing on someone's record, when I was in a massive depressive episode, or like what I probably look back and think of as an autistic burnout. And the thing about not having the labels of like autism and ADHD, the stuff that I'm so proudly sharing now, people find other words to describe you anyway, and they fill in the gaps and tell the stories they want to tell. So I love that I'm able to be a public figure and a solo artist and just be real. And it's also a great leveler. If anyone finds that uncomfortable, they probably won't want to hang out with me, and that's kind of great. It means you kind of get to surround yourself with people that value what you do and who you are. But having said that, it is very vulnerable work, and I think it shouldn't be done lightly. I think for any album, whether it's to do with something traumatic or a breakup or big change or grief. Artists always write music to help process big emotions and experiences in their lives. But I think there's a lot of work that needs to go around kind of like the branding of it. I know that's such a terrible word. People hate using it. But, what is the elevator pitch for an album that's about the loss of your grandmother? Because if you choose the right words, it will faithfully represent the music and your experience, but do it in a way that sort of protects you from a lot of the bigger words and bigger feelings that might otherwise be brought up. And the more you can practice that language and tell the right types of stories about it, the more you kind of get to retain other parts just for yourself in your personal life. But it takes work. You can't just like rock up on RRR and be ready to start telling the stories. It's copywriting and it's thinking and it's liner notes and all those things that help get you to that point. So I hope that helps.
Before we finish, Nat, what are you working on at the moment? What's 2025 looking like?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm trying to work on 2 major commissions. They're both jazz commissions, actually, which is unusual. Classical is more the realm of the commissions. But one is for like a sort of special entry music school. Actually, it might be announced now, but it's for VCA secondary school. And it's for their sort of major concert at the Recital Centre. And then the other is for a big jazz ensemble for the end of the year. And in both of those scenarios, there'll be classical players as well. And actually, both of them, I'm going big with the feelings. How predictable. The VCAS one is about giving those young students a chance to think about how to kind of process this incredibly difficult world we seem to be in right now, with a lot of mindfulness and kindness. And it includes like a sort of Jacob Collier-inspired massive group vocal ambient thing happening from all the choir stalls. Like there'll be 100 VCAS kids singing by the end. I just will be wearing socks that match and no fisherman pants. But I'd like to think the sound will be very lush and beautiful. And then the second one is actually inspired by interviews with climate scientists and is in particular from the Bureau of Meteorology. I'm starting to chat to someone there about interviewing several people. And yeah, it's about how do you get up in the morning and keep working towards mitigating climate change when you feel like the world is already on fire and everybody is distracted with so many other things. And what can the average person learn from that way of being in the world? And it's been really emotional work sitting and talking about it, and hopefully the end product is really impactful in some way for whoever gets to hear it, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm playing at Fed Square.
Oh yes, the plug. Get the plug in.
I'm playing Forever Changed in pretty much in full, for free on Saturday. There's 3 shows at Fed Square as part of their school holiday program. They're during the day. I'm also playing it at some pieces at Melbourne Recital Centre on the 5th of May, and I'm also playing it at Royal Albert Hall soon.
Excuse me? Wow.
Yeah.
When's that?
It's at so I'm pitching Forever Changed in Europe at Classical Next, the sort of
big European
expo classical music
thing. Yep.
And then I'm playing as part of the Steinway piano series in the Elgar Room at Royal Albert Hall, which is kind of like the salon of Royal Albert Hall.
Oh, don't mention that.
But yeah,
it's the Royal Albert Hall. Just say that.
Yeah. I just can't. I need to be honest. I don't want people walking away thinking I'm
still the Royal
actually
Albert Hall. I'm sure.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
It's very special.
Oh my goodness.
So come along, and if you know anybody in London, please get them to come, because what would be even better is saying I've sold out Royal Albert Hall. Yeah, that'd be real good.
And hang on, but to bring it back, the Fed Square gig is this weekend.
This weekend on Saturday.
Great.
Yeah. So please come down.
Now, thank you for this music. It's like
Thank
on
you so
behalf
much.
of myself and everyone else who uses it to soothe or just to enrich a moment of washing the dishes or being on the tram or wherever it might be. And thank you for all of your music. But also, as a few people have pointed out, like for your generosity in terms of sharing who you are and what motivates you. And Nat is going to stick around for a bit, and I hope you do too. If you feel like sticking around for a minute, come and say hi.
Yeah.
Thanks for all of you for coming. Thank you to APRA for organising this, and for the kind staff here for making it so easy.
And thank you to Tim.
Yes, thank you to me, of course. All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you both so much. Just a final little bit of housekeeping. The wonderful folks at APRA